An elderly mechanic repairs Keanu Reeves' car, and a week later, Keanu stops by and is shocked when. It was a quiet morning at Joe's garage. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a soft golden light over the small, dusty town. Joe, an elderly mechanic, was already at work, fixing an old truck that had been brought in the night before. His garage wasn't anything fancy, just a humble little building tucked away on the edge of town. But to the locals, it was a place where you could always count on a job well done. Joe had been working with cars for over 50 years. From the time he was a boy, he'd always loved taking things apart and putting them back together. It wasn't just about fixing broken parts. It was about understanding how everything worked, how each piece came together to create something greater. Over the years, he'd learned all kinds of tricks and techniques that most mechanics couldn't even dream of. He was known for his precision, and that's why people trusted him. On this particular morning, as Joe worked, the sound of an engine pulled him out of his thoughts. At first, he thought it was just another local car coming in for a tune-up, but when he looked up, he was surprised to see a sleek black car pulling into the parking lot. It wasn't just any car. This was a luxury vehicle, one that Joe had only seen in magazines. It gleamed under the sun, its shiny surface reflecting the light in dazzling patterns. As the car came to a stop in front of his garage, Joe didn't know what to think. He'd seen all kinds of cars in his years, rusty old trucks, classic cars, and even some high-end vehicles. But this one was different. It looked brand new, almost like it had just rolled off the showroom floor. The kind of car that most people only dreamed of owning. Joe wasn't one to get excited easily, but even he had to admit that he was intrigued. A man stepped out of the car, and Joe's eyes widened in disbelief. It was none other than Keanu Reeves, the famous actor known for his roles in The Matrix and John Wick. Joe had seen him on TV and in movies, but he never imagined that he'd actually meet him in person. Keanu smiled and waved, and Joe, still in shock, quickly wiped his hands on a rag and walked over to greet him. "Hey there, I've heard good things about you," Keanu said, his voice friendly and down-to-earth. "I've got a problem with my car. It's been making a strange noise, and I thought I'd bring it to you." Joe was speechless for a moment. Here he was, standing in front of a Hollywood star. He couldn't believe it. "Well, I'll do my best to take care of it for you," Joe finally managed to say. "What seems to be the problem?" Keanu explained that the car had been making a clicking sound every time he turned the wheel. It wasn't anything too serious, but it had been bothering him. He wasn't sure what was causing it, and since he was in town filming a movie, he didn't want to waste time searching for a mechanic. He'd heard that Joe had a great reputation, and he figured he'd give him a shot. Joe examined the car carefully. He'd worked on a lot of vehicles in his time, but this one was unlike anything he had ever seen. The engine was a complex piece of machinery, with parts and systems that Joe didn't immediately recognize. But he wasn't one to back down from a challenge. He had always prided himself on being able to fix anything, no matter how complicated. He wasn't about to let the fact that it was Keanu Reeves' car intimidate him. "Don't worry," Joe said with a grin. "I've got this." Keanu smiled back. "Thanks, I really appreciate it." With that, Keanu handed over the keys and told Joe to take his time. He didn't need the car for a few days and wasn't in any rush to get it back. He made a point to say that he trusted Joe's skills and was happy to leave it in his hands. As Keanu walked away, he turned back and waved, giving Joe a smile before getting into his car and driving off. Joe stood there for a moment, holding the keys, still in disbelief. He couldn't believe what had just happened. It wasn't every day that a celebrity walked into your garage and trusted you with something as valuable as their car. But Joe wasn't the type of person to get caught up in the excitement. He had a job to do, and that was what mattered most. Turning his attention back to the car, Joe opened the hood and began inspecting the engine. He worked methodically, checking each component and listening for the sound that Keanu had described. As he worked, Joe couldn't help but think about how far he had come in his career. When he started out, he had no idea that he would end up fixing cars for people all over town, let alone a Hollywood star. It had been a long journey, but he had always done what he loved, and that was enough for him. As Joe worked, his apprentice, a young man named Alex, came over to see what was going on. Alex had been working with Joe for the past few months, learning the ropes and picking up tips from the master mechanic. He was eager to prove himself, and Joe could see that he had potential. "Wow, Joe, is that Keanu Reeves' car?" Alex asked, his eyes wide with excitement. Joe chuckled. Yep, it sure is. He came in for a repair. Alex could hardly believe it. He had grown up watching Keanu's movies, and the idea that the actor was in their little town in their garage was almost too much to process. Do you think we'll meet him again? Alex asked, looking at Joe with wide-eyed wonder. Who knows, Joe said, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. But for now, we've got work to do. Let's focus on fixing this car. With that, the two of them got to work. Joe explained to Alex what he was doing, pointing out different parts of the car's engine and describing how it all worked. Joe had always been a great teacher, and Alex was eager to learn. As they worked together, Joe couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This was what he was good at, repairing cars, teaching others, and taking pride in his work. But there was something else that kept running through his mind, the fact that Keanu had come to him for help. That small, simple act of trust meant more to Joe than anything else. It wasn't just about fixing the car. It was about earning the respect of someone like Keanu Reeves. For Joe, that was a reminder of why he had spent so many years in the garage, doing what he loved. As the day wore on, the car was nearly finished. Joe had managed to locate the problem, a loose part in the steering system that had been causing the clicking noise. It was a simple fix, but it had taken a keen eye and a lot of experience to spot it. He tightened the last bolt, and the car was as good as new. All right, Alex, I think we're done here, Joe said, wiping his hands on a rag. Let's get this car ready for pickup. As Joe stood back and admired his work, he couldn't help but smile. It wasn't just the fact that he had fixed Keanu's car. It was the satisfaction of doing what he loved, doing it well, and doing it with pride. He was ready to see Keanu again, and this time he was prepared for whatever came next. Joe carefully looked over the car, his mind sharp and focused. He had seen many vehicles in his time, some old, some new, and some that had been through things no car should go through. But this one was different. It was sleek and modern, with lines that spoke of advanced technology and precision engineering. He was familiar with cars, no matter how complex they seemed, but this luxury model pushed him to think differently. Even though Joe was an elderly mechanic, his hands had never stopped working. His mind never grew tired of solving problems, and that was the reason people trusted him with their cars. From a young age, he had been drawn to the intricacies of machines. He was always fascinated by how things worked, and the car before him was no exception. The engine was like a puzzle, and he was ready to put the pieces together. Joe took a step back, staring at the engine, trying to assess the issue. Keanu had told him there was a clicking sound when the steering wheel turned, but Joe knew that a noise was only a symptom. It was never the problem. He needed to find the root cause. With a calm sigh, he began by popping the hood open. He leaned in close, his eyes scanning every part, from the shiny steel parts to the intricate wiring that ran through the car. He could feel the weight of the car's luxury, the high expectations attached to it, but Joe wasn't intimidated. He had worked with all kinds of cars over the years. Whether it was an old pickup truck, a classic muscle car, or a sleek sports car, Joe knew that they all had their secrets, and it was his job to uncover them. First, he checked the steering system. That was where Keanu had mentioned the issue, so Joe decided to start there. As he examined the steering column, Joe gently turned the wheel, listening carefully for the clicking sound that Keanu had described. He turned it slowly, then more quickly, his ears picking up every little noise. There it was, a faint click, almost imperceptible. It wasn't coming from the wheel itself, but from deeper within the system. That's odd, Joe muttered to himself. He scratched his chin thoughtfully and then made his way to the underside of the car. Getting under it was a routine for Joe. It didn't matter if it was a luxury car or an old beater. He'd get under the car and take a look. The undercarriage was where so many problems could hide. From the exhaust system to the suspension, anything could go wrong. Lying on his back, Joe peered up into the belly of the car. He noticed the smooth, modern suspension system and the tight, clean design. This car was built for comfort, but comfort wasn't always what mattered in a mechanic's world. Reliability did. Joe moved his flashlight around, inspecting every part closely. He found the source of the clicking noise almost by accident. There was a loose bolt in the suspension system, a small part, but it was enough to cause the noise Keanu had mentioned. Joe smiled to himself. It was a simple fix, but many mechanics might have missed it, especially with the car's complex design. It was a small detail, one that could have easily been overlooked. But Joe's experience was his strength. He had worked with so many different makes and models of cars that he knew how to spot the tiniest issues before they became big problems. He reached for his toolbox, grabbing the wrench he needed to tighten the bolt. The sound of the metal scraping against the steel was satisfying, like a song he'd heard 1,000 times. It was the sound of progress, of problems being solved. He worked steadily, his hands moving quickly, confidently. The wrench fit perfectly in his hand, a tool he had used for decades, but it never felt old or worn to him. It was a part of him as much as his own hands were. Once he had tightened the bolt, Joe stood up and wiped the sweat from his forehead. It wasn't a huge job, but it was one that required care and attention. Joe had always believed that no job was too small to be done right. Whether it was a major engine overhaul or a simple bolt tightening, he put his heart into it. He knew that a mechanic's reputation wasn't built on the size of the job, but on the care and effort he put into every repair. He took a step back and admired the work he had done. The car looked as good as it had when it first arrived, maybe even better. The loose bolt had been fixed, and Joe was confident that the clicking sound would be gone. It was a job well done, but Joe wasn't finished yet. He wasn't one to rush through things. He believed in doing things right, and that meant going over every inch of the car to make sure everything was in top shape. Joe moved on to the other parts of the car, checking the brakes, the tires, the fluid levels. He found that everything else was in perfect condition. This car was in great shape, and Joe knew it would be ready to hit the road again as soon as Keanu came to pick it up. As he worked, Alex, his apprentice, walked over and looked at the car. Alex had been learning from Joe for the past few months, watching him work, picking up tips, and asking questions. He was eager to prove himself, and Joe could see that the young man had a passion for the craft. But there was still a lot to learn. Joe was happy to teach him, though. He believed in passing on his knowledge, making sure that the next generation of mechanics could carry on the tradition of hard work and dedication. "Looks like you've got it all figured out, huh?" Alex said, his voice filled with admiration. Joe grinned, wiping his hands on a rag. "It's all about the details, Alex. Never overlook the small stuff. If you can catch the little problems before they become big ones, you'll save a lot of headaches down the road." Alex nodded, his eyes bright with understanding. "I'll keep that in mind." Joe chuckled and went back to the car. He wasn't done yet. He always went the extra mile, even if it meant spending a little more time on a repair than was necessary. It wasn't about the money or the time, it was about the pride he took in his work. Joe believed that if you did something with care and dedication, the results would speak for themselves. He finished up the final checks and gave the car one last look. Everything was perfect. Joe was ready to call it a day, but before he did, he made a note in his repair log, just as he always did. It was a small habit, but one that kept him organized and reminded him of the work he had done. As he closed the hood and stood up, he took a moment to reflect. It had been a good day. He had fixed another car, solved another problem, and done it all with the skill and precision he had honed over a lifetime. He felt a sense of satisfaction, knowing that when Keanu came back for the car, he would be pleased. It wasn't just about fixing the car, it was about making sure the job was done right. And that's what Joe always did. The days passed quietly in Joe's small garage. The sun rose and set as it always did, casting warm light through the windows and slowly fading into the evening. Joe kept busy with his usual repairs, working on old trucks and cars from around the town. He never minded the repetition. Each car had its own set of challenges, its own little quirks. For Joe, every repair was a new puzzle to solve. Over the past few years, the garage had become more than just a place of work. It had become a safe haven for him, a place where he could focus on something he loved. The sound of tools clinking against metal, the quiet hum of the car engines, and the smell of oil and grease. It was all familiar and comforting. Even though the world around him had changed, Joe had always found peace in the steady rhythm of his work. But this week felt different. It wasn't because the work had changed, but because of Keanu's car. Since the moment it had rolled into his shop, Joe had felt an extra sense of responsibility. This wasn't just another car. It was Keanu Reeves' car, the same Keanu Reeves who had appeared on countless screens, whose face was known by millions of people around the world. For most mechanics, that would have been a big deal, something to brag about. But not Joe. He had always been the humble type, never one to seek attention or show off. Still, he couldn't help but think about Keanu's visit from time to time. It wasn't every day that a celebrity walked into your shop, trusted you with their car, and left it in your hands without a second thought. Joe couldn't deny that it had made an impact on him, even if it was subtle. It made him realize that his reputation had reached further than he had ever imagined. It was a reminder that no matter how small his garage was, he had built a life and a career that people trusted. Despite these thoughts, the week passed without any further surprises. Keanu hadn't come back yet, but Joe wasn't worried. He knew that the car was in perfect condition, and there was no reason for him to rush. Besides, Keanu had told him not to hurry. The actor was busy filming, and Joe understood that. His world was different from Joe's, filled with glamorous events and hectic schedules, while Joe's world was a little quieter and slower. But that didn't bother him. He liked it that way. In the mornings, Joe would grab a cup of coffee from the small diner down the street. It was the same routine he had followed for years. The diner was run by Mrs. Thompson, a friendly woman who always made sure Joe had a hot cup of coffee waiting for him. She was one of the few people in town who understood Joe's quiet life. She didn't mind the long silences or the fact that he didn't talk much about his past. She just liked having him around. "Busy day today, Joe?" Mrs. Thompson would always ask, setting his coffee in front of him. Joe would smile and nod, taking a slow sip from his cup. "Always busy, you know how it is." The days stretched on, and Joe found comfort in the simplicity of his routine. He spent the afternoons working on a mix of repairs, an old pickup truck here, a classic car there. There was always something to do. As he worked, Joe thought about how lucky he was to have a job that he loved. Some people spent their lives chasing success or fame, but Joe had always felt that the real treasure was in doing something you were good at. For him, there was no greater satisfaction than hearing the sound of an engine purring after a job well done. Joe didn't expect anything more from life. He had never been the kind of man to ask for much. A roof over his head, a steady job, and the ability to keep doing what he loved, that was enough for him. The world outside his garage could change, but Joe remained constant. He had built his life around what mattered most to him, his work, his routine, and the quiet moments that came with them. As the week went on, the car sat in the corner of the garage, ready to be picked up. Joe had polished it, checked every detail, and made sure that it was in perfect condition. He could already tell that the issue with the steering had been fixed. He wasn't sure when Keanu would come back for it, but Joe didn't mind the wait. He wasn't in a hurry. In the evenings, Joe would sit on the small porch outside his house, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The town around him seemed to slow down with the setting sun. The streets became quieter, the air cooler. He'd listen to the sounds of crickets chirping, and sometimes in the distance, the faint sound of a dog barking. It was peaceful, and it reminded him that there was beauty in the simple things, things that most people overlooked in their rush to get somewhere. Every now and then, Joe would look at the car parked in his garage, thinking about how it had all come to be. He never asked for this kind of recognition. He didn't need a celebrity's approval to feel good about his work. But somehow, Keanu's visit had made him feel a little more appreciated, even if it was just for a brief moment. It made Joe realize that his work had value, not just to the people who lived in the town, but to others who recognized the effort and skill he put into every repair. But as the days passed, Joe's thoughts began to drift. It wasn't about the fame or the attention. What mattered to him was the feeling of satisfaction he got from a job well done. The quiet moments in his garage, the routine of working with his hands, and the sense that he was contributing to something bigger than himself. That was what he valued. It was another quiet evening when Joe found himself leaning back in his chair, looking up at the sky. The stars were just beginning to appear, twinkling faintly in the night sky. He thought about how long he had been working on cars, how many years he had spent under the hoods of countless vehicles. And yet it always felt the same, like the first time he had picked up a wrench, like the first time he had repaired a broken engine. He smiled to himself. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it was his life. It was simple, steady, and exactly what he wanted. A week had passed since Keanu dropped off the car, and Joe hadn't heard a word from him. But that didn't bother him. Joe was used to waiting. People had lives to live, things to do, and sometimes they got busy. But when Keanu was ready, he'd come back. And when he did, Joe would be ready too. As the night grew darker, Joe stood up, stretched, and walked back into the garage. The car was waiting just as he had left it. Joe ran his fingers lightly over the smooth surface of the hood, a gesture of appreciation for the car, for his work, and for the quiet week he had spent making things right. It was time to rest. Tomorrow would bring another day, another repair, and another opportunity to do what he loved. The week had passed quickly, and Joe's routine had remained unchanged. The cars kept coming in, the repairs kept happening, and each day ended quietly as he wiped his hands clean and settled into his evening routine. He didn't mind. He had learned long ago to appreciate the stillness, the predictability of his work. The world might move at a faster pace outside his small garage, but here, time seemed to move a little slower. It was a pace that suited him. Yet every now and then, his mind wandered back to Keanu and the car. Joe knew that when Keanu returned, he would be pleased. The car was in perfect condition now, with the clicking noise completely gone. Joe had done a thorough job, the kind of job that spoke for itself. He hadn't needed to rush through it. In fact, he had enjoyed working on the sleek luxury vehicle. It was a challenge, but one that he met with confidence. The day had started like any other. Joe had worked on a few cars in the morning, fixing a broken radiator here and checking an old engine there. He wasn't in a hurry, there was no need. The sun was high in the sky, and the soft hum of the tools and engines filled the air. It was peaceful. Around noon, as Joe was taking a break, wiping the sweat off his brow, he heard the sound of a car engine approaching. He didn't think much of it at first. Cars came and went all the time, but when the engine cut off, he heard the sound of tires rolling to a stop in front of his garage. Then, the unmistakable click of a door opening and closing. Joe wiped his hands on his work apron and looked up. His heart skipped a beat. The car was back, the luxury vehicle Keanu had brought in just a week ago. It wasn't the kind of car Joe was used to seeing, and he hadn't expected it to return so soon. Keanu's familiar figure appeared in the doorway of the garage, a small smile on his face. "Hey there," he called out, his voice as warm and down-to-earth as it had been when they first met. Joe stood up, surprised to see him so soon. He had expected Keanu to take his time, maybe even forget about the car until much later. But here he was, right on time and with the same easy smile that Joe had grown to appreciate. "Hello, Mr. Reeves," Joe said, trying to hide the surprise in his voice. "I didn't expect you so soon. The car's all ready for you." Keanu gave a nod and stepped closer. "I'm sorry to drop by so suddenly," he said, his tone apologetic but genuine. "I've been busy with the movie, but I've been thinking about the car. I had a little free time today, and I figured I'd come by and see how it turned out." Joe couldn't help but feel a little nervous. It wasn't every day that someone like Keanu Reeves showed up in his garage. He had done his best with the car, but part of him still wondered how the actor would react. "Come on in," Joe said, gesturing toward the car. "It's ready. I tightened up that bolt, checked the whole steering system. Everything is good to go." Keanu nodded and walked over to the car, his eyes scanning over it as though searching for any sign of imperfection. Joe could see the moment the actor noticed it, the clean shine of the car's exterior, the sleekness of the polished metal. The vehicle looked as though it had just rolled out of a showroom, as if Joe had never even touched it. Keanu stepped closer to the car, running his hand lightly over the hood, inspecting every detail. For a moment there was complete silence between them, the only sound being the soft breeze that blew through the open garage doors. Joe stood back, watching, waiting. He wasn't sure what Keanu would say next, but he knew that it was important to remain calm. This was a job well done, and he had to trust in his work. Finally, Keanu turned to Joe, his expression filled with genuine appreciation. "I can't believe how great it looks," he said, his voice full of sincerity. "You really took care of it. I'm impressed." Joe smiled, feeling a wave of pride wash over him. He didn't expect praise, but hearing it from someone like Keanu meant more than he cared to admit. "I'm glad you're happy with it," Joe replied. "It was my pleasure." Keanu walked around the car, taking in the work Joe had done. "I'll tell you something, Joe," he said, turning back to face him. "When I first brought this car in, I wasn't sure what to expect. I've been to a lot of shops, but there's something different about this place. You really know your stuff." Joe's heart warmed at the compliment. It wasn't something he had ever heard before, at least not from someone like Keanu. He had always kept a low profile, focusing only on his work. To hear such praise made him feel like all the years he had spent honing his craft had truly paid off. Keanu smiled again, his eyes twinkling with gratitude. I don't think I could have found a better mechanic for the job, and that's saying a lot considering how picky I am with my cars. Joe chuckled, feeling a little embarrassed by the praise but also flattered. Well, I do my best. Keanu's smile faded slightly as he paused for a moment. He took a deep breath, as though he was preparing to say something important. I know I said I'd just pick it up and leave, but I've been thinking, Keanu said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. I've had this car for a while, and honestly, it's not something I use all that much. It's just sitting there, taking up space. And I can tell that you care about this kind of work, Joe, so I want to offer you something. Joe looked at him, confused. Offer me something. I'm not sure I understand. Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out the keys to the car. I want you to have it, he said, holding the keys out to Joe. As a thank you for your work, this car, it's yours now. Joe's mouth went dry. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at the keys in Keanu's hand, unable to process what had just been said. What do you mean? Joe asked, his voice barely a whisper. I mean it, Keanu said, his tone gentle but firm. You've done something for me that not many people would. You've taken care of something that's important to me, and I want to show my appreciation. So I'm giving it to you. It's yours. Joe felt his knees weaken. This wasn't happening. He had just fixed the car. It wasn't supposed to be anything more than that. But here was Keanu, offering him his luxury vehicle as though it were the most natural thing in the world. I can't accept this, Joe said, shaking his head. This is too much. I just did my job. It's enough to know you're happy with the work. Keanu smiled warmly. You're a humble guy, Joe, I can tell, but this is something I want to do. You deserve it. For a long moment, Joe simply stood there, stunned by the offer. He had never imagined anything like this happening to him, but as he looked at Keanu, he saw the sincerity in his eyes. He had no doubt that Keanu was serious. Slowly, Joe reached out and took the keys. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know what to say. Keanu gave a soft laugh. You don't have to say anything, just enjoy it. You've earned it. Frank wiped his hands on a rag, the scent of engine oil clinging to his fingers, and stepped back to admire the work he had done on the sleek car. It gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, every curve polished, every part carefully checked. Even though it was a high-tech luxury car, to Frank, it felt like one of his old trucks, full of personality, stubborn at times, but honest if treated right. He had spent hours tinkering with it, adjusting small mechanisms no one else would notice. He smiled quietly to himself. He didn't do it for fame or money. He did it because it felt right, like finishing a puzzle just perfectly. A soft rumble of tires drew his attention, and he looked up. The black car rolled into the garage once more, and in the driver's seat sat Keanu Reeves, his expression calm, but with a spark of curiosity in his eyes. Frank felt a small flutter in his chest. He had met the actor before, yes, but seeing someone so famous quietly approach his little garage still felt strange. Hey there, Frank, Keanu said, his voice gentle, almost shy. How's it going? Doing all right, Frank replied, keeping his tone casual. Car's ready, should run smoother than a cat on a sunny porch. He smiled, but Keanu's eyes didn't leave the car. There was a pause, almost like the actor was studying it. Keanu stepped out and walked around the car slowly. He crouched near the wheels, tapped lightly on the panels, and then opened the driver's door. He slid into the seat and started the engine. At first, there was just the familiar purr of the engine, but then Keanu's eyebrows lifted slightly. He shifted gears and gently pressed the pedals. The car responded perfectly, smoothly, as if it had learned to anticipate every move. This is incredible, Keanu said softly, almost to himself. He turned to Frank, eyes wide with surprise. I've never felt it like this before. The steering, it's so precise but still alive. And the engine, it feels like it's thinking with me. I don't even know how you did this. Frank leaned against his workbench, arms crossed, a small smirk on his face. He had expected this reaction, but hearing it aloud still gave him a quiet satisfaction. It's nothing fancy, he said, shrugging. Just a little patience, some careful hands, and listening to what the car wants. Machines have a rhythm, you just gotta follow it. Keanu shook his head, laughing softly. Patience, listening, with a car like this? He looked like he wanted to believe it, but the disbelief was obvious. Most people who work on cars like mine just throw parts at it, hoping something sticks. But this, you didn't just fix it. You improved it, Frank chuckled. Improved it? Nah, just cleaned up what was already there, like polishing a piece of silver. You don't add anything new. You just bring out the shine that was always hiding inside. Keanu nodded slowly, almost reverently. He leaned back in the seat, gripping the steering wheel with a mixture of amazement and respect. You know, I've driven some of the best mechanics in the world, people who work on cars for celebrities every day. Some are very technical, some are fast, some are expensive. But no one has ever treated a car like it was alive, like it has feelings or personality. Frank laughed quietly. That's because most of them don't care about personality. They care about speed, or money, or reputation. I care about the machine, that's all. It talks to me if you know how to listen. Keanu looked thoughtful, and for a moment Frank thought the actor might say something like he didn't understand. But then Keanu smiled, that quiet, warm smile he was famous for. I get it, he said simply. I really do, and it's rare. You're rare, Frank? Frank felt his chest tighten. Rare, he hadn't been called that in a long time, maybe never. He looked down at his worn shoes, embarrassed, and muttered, I'm just an old man who likes engines. No, Keanu said firmly, his eyes meeting Frank's. You're more than that. You see things differently. You treat things with respect. That's inspiring. Frank felt a lump in his throat. He wasn't used to compliments, especially not from someone like Keanu Reeves. He cleared his throat and gestured toward the car. Just make sure you don't test it too hard. It's a fine machine, but it's got feelings too, you know. Keanu laughed, a sound full of genuine amusement. I'll be gentle, promise, but Frank, I wish everyone could see the way you work, not just on cars, but in life. The care, the patience, the thoughtfulness. It's rare, like I said. For a long moment they stood together in silence, the only sounds the soft hum of the engine and the distant birds outside the garage. Frank realized something. The car wasn't the only thing alive here. This quiet recognition, this moment of connection, felt just as electric as any engine could. Finally, Keanu opened the door and stepped out. You know, he said, leaning slightly on the car, I'm going to tell people about this. Not to brag, but to show them it's possible. Someone with experience, patience, and respect can make things better in ways technology can't. Frank shook his head, waving his hand dismissively. Don't bother. I don't need anyone to know. People who care will see it anyway. Keanu smiled knowingly. Well, some people need to hear it, and I'll make sure they do. You deserve that, Frank. Frank felt a strange warmth in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. He had spent decades working quietly, helping people without any expectation of praise, quietly mastering his craft. And now, someone famous, someone who had the world's eyes on him, recognized him. You're too kind, Frank said finally, his voice quieter than usual. No, Keanu replied, placing a hand lightly on the car's hood as if in respect. You're extraordinary, don't ever forget that. The actor smiled, waved, and got into the car. Frank watched as the sleek machine rolled out of his garage, its engine purring with life and vitality, responding as though it understood every command. And in that moment, Frank felt a deep satisfaction, not just from the car, but from the connection he had made, the quiet acknowledgement of a lifetime of work. After the car disappeared down the street, Frank went back into his garage, hands still smelling faintly of oil. He leaned on his workbench and smiled to himself. Life hadn't been easy. He had known long days, cold mornings, and the quiet hum of loneliness. But moments like this made every hour, every ache, every worry worth it. He poured himself a cup of coffee, the familiar warmth soothing his hands, and thought about the simplicity of his life. A garage, a few tools, and the machines that spoke to him in ways no one else could hear. And now he realized sometimes those machines could connect people too. Not just him and a car, but him and someone from a world he had only seen in magazines. He shook his head, chuckling quietly. Life had a funny way of surprising you, even when you thought you had seen everything. And today it had. Frank looked around his garage at the worn floors, the old posters, the tools hanging in careful order. He realized that his work, quiet, patient, careful, was more than just repairing cars. It was teaching, sharing, inspiring in small, subtle ways. And sometimes those small ways created moments big enough to last a lifetime. He took a deep breath, sipped his coffee, and smiled. The garage was quiet again, the kind of quiet that felt full of possibilities. And Frank knew, in that simple, wonderful way he always did, that life was good. The sun was beginning to dip behind the hills, casting long, golden shadows across Frank's little garage. The air smelled faintly of oil, metal, and a hint of old leather from the workbench. The day had been quiet after Keanu had left, and for the first time in weeks, Frank felt a deep, peaceful stillness. He leaned against the edge of the bench, looking around the garage. Each tool hung in its place, each surface bore the marks of decades of careful work. And in that ordinary, familiar space, Frank realized something extraordinary had happened. The visit from Keanu Reeves had shaken him in a way he hadn't expected. Not because he was a celebrity, Frank had met plenty of important people in his life, but because someone had recognized the value of his quiet work. Someone had seen the patience, the care, and the thoughtfulness that went into every job he undertook. And it wasn't just the recognition that mattered, it was the understanding. For the first time, he felt that someone truly understood the rhythm of his life, the way he approached every car, every problem, every challenge. He picked up a wrench, feeling its familiar weight, and smiled. It was a simple tool, yet in his hands, it had been part of something extraordinary. For years, Frank had fixed cars, trucks, and motorcycles for neighbors, friends, and strangers alike. He had never cared about fame or money. For him, the work itself was the reward. But now, in the quiet aftermath of the day, he understood that his efforts had touched someone in a way he hadn't anticipated. As he tightened a loose bolt on an old motorcycle in the corner, he thought about Keanu's words. "You're extraordinary, don't ever forget that." Frank chuckled softly. Extraordinary was not a word he would have used to describe himself. He had always been an ordinary man with ordinary skills, working quietly, unnoticed. Yet hearing it from someone else, someone whose life seemed so far removed from his own, made it feel real, like a hidden truth finally being acknowledged. The sound of the garage door creaking interrupted his thoughts. A small group of local kids had wandered in, curious about the commotion earlier with the celebrity car. Frank smiled at them. "Come on in," he said. "Want to see how an engine works?" Their eyes widened as they looked around, taking in the rows of tools, the engines stacked in corners, and the gleaming cars. "Wow," one of the boys exclaimed. "This place is like a treasure chest of cars," Frank laughed. "Treasure chest, huh? I suppose it is in a way. Every car here has a story, every tool has a memory. And you know what? If you pay attention, they'll tell you secrets too." The children gathered around him, and Frank began to explain, in his slow, deliberate way, the basics of engines. He showed them how pistons moved, how gears connected, and how patience could solve problems no machine could fix on its own. The kids listened intently, asking questions, their excitement and curiosity filling the garage. For Frank, it was the perfect way to end the day. Sharing knowledge, passing on skills, inspiring someone younger, it was another kind of legacy. After the kids left, Frank sat down on a stool near the workbench, the quiet settling around him like a comforting blanket. He reflected on the week, on how a simple act of doing his job with care had led to something unexpected. The world outside his garage might be fast, loud, and obsessed with fame, but here in this little corner, the work itself was the story. Every engine, every bolt, every spark had meaning. And now, he realized, so did the recognition he had received. He thought about Keanu again. The actor had left not with fanfare, but with genuine admiration. It wasn't just about the car being fixed. It was about understanding the effort, the patience, and the love that went into it. Frank realized that life was full of these quiet victories, moments that might not make headlines but carried immense value. And sometimes, when the right person came along, they could see it. The evening light spilled through the garage windows, casting a warm glow on the tools and engines. Frank felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not just for the work he had done, but for the life he had lived. He had spent decades honing his skills, quietly perfecting his craft, and now someone had recognized the depth of that mastery. It wasn't fame or wealth, it was respect, understanding, and acknowledgement of a lifetime of dedication. He poured himself a small glass of water and sipped it slowly, savoring the calm. The garage had always been his world, a place of comfort and purpose. But now it felt bigger. It felt like a place where ordinary efforts could touch extraordinary lives. He realized that even the smallest acts of care, patience, and skill could ripple outward, creating moments that mattered far beyond his expectations. Frank rose from his stool and walked over to the car he had repaired for Keanu. It was gone, of course, but the memory of it lingered in his mind. He imagined it on the open road, handling perfectly, responding to every turn, every press of the pedal, as if it remembered his touch. A quiet smile formed on his face. That car, that simple machine, had become a symbol of something greater. The idea that attention, respect, and skill could transform even the ordinary into something remarkable. As night fell, Frank switched off the lights in the garage, leaving only a small lamp glowing on the workbench. He sat back down, feeling the weight of his years in his bones but also a lightness in his spirit. The day had reminded him that life's rewards were often quiet, subtle, and deeply personal. Recognition could come from unexpected places, and sometimes it arrived in the form of a smile, a word of gratitude, or even a simple acknowledgement from someone whose life seemed far removed from his own. He thought about the future and the legacy he would leave behind. Not fame, not fortune, but skills, stories, and lessons that could be passed down. He imagined a young mechanic, decades from now, discovering the same patience, the same respect for machines that had guided him through life. He imagined them finding joy in the rhythm of work, the quiet satisfaction of a task completed well, and the unexpected recognition that sometimes comes when least expected. Frank leaned back, hands resting on the workbench, and felt a sense of peace wash over him. The garage was quiet, the machines sleeping, and the world outside moving on in its busy way. But inside, in that small space filled with tools, memories, and effort, something timeless had happened. A simple act of care, done with attention and respect, had connected two lives in a way neither would forget. He closed his eyes for a moment, imagining the smooth hum of the car he had repaired, the warmth of the sun on its polished surface, and the astonished look on Keanu's face. He smiled to himself. Life was full of surprises, he realized. Sometimes the smallest actions could create the biggest moments. Sometimes quiet work done with love could touch someone in ways that fame, money, or speed never could. As he rose to leave, Frank looked around the garage one last time for the night. The tools gleamed softly in the dim light, the engines rested quietly, and the workbench held the marks of countless projects. He felt a sense of gratitude for his skills, his life, the simple joys of creation, and the rare moments of recognition that reminded him that all of it mattered. Stepping outside, he breathed in the cool night air, feeling the stars above as if they were watching over him. He knew that tomorrow would bring more work, more cars, more small tasks that required patience, skill, and care. And he would embrace it all as he always had, quietly, carefully, and with a heart full of pride in the simple, extraordinary work he did. Frank walked home slowly, the streets empty, the world calm. He thought about how life had a way of rewarding those who persisted quietly, those who gave their best without expecting applause. And he realized that sometimes the most meaningful moments were the ones that arrived softly, unexpectedly, and stayed in your memory forever. He reached his small, cozy house, the lights welcoming him back. Inside, everything was ordinary, simple, familiar. Yet after today, everything felt touched by something extraordinary. A life lived with patience, care, and attention could leave a mark, not just on machines, but on people. And that was a legacy worth leaving. Frank closed the door behind him, leaning against it for a moment. He felt tired, yes, but happy. He thought again of Keanu's words, "You're extraordinary, don't ever forget that." And for the first time in a long while, Frank allowed himself to believe it. The night deepened, quiet and still, but inside Frank there was a warmth that would not fade. His work, his life, and the small acts of care he had given would ripple outward in ways he might never see. And that, he realized, was the most satisfying part of all. He poured a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the stars twinkle above. Life was good, he thought. Simple, quiet, patient, and sometimes quietly extraordinary.